Cry for me, 君の
Of course, already scuffed. How's it going? If anyone's here, how's it going, everybody? This is already starting out real scuffed, by the way, but thank you so much for joining me. Whether you're here live or you're showing up in post is all the same to me. If anything, I am far more grateful just if you're here at all because, you know, I mean, it shows support. Let's get some music going in the background. Yes, there we go. Now this is just going to be from the playlist, so it should have a lot of stuff, but it's like going to be just kind of random. Yeah, so this is going to be a bit interesting because I don't have the stuff I can display. Because, there's not like screenshots or anything. So I'm just going to show gameplay from one of the episodes that I thought was just kind of broad and covered everything. But it'll be more of the visual side of stuff where I will then just have the opportunity to talk and be able to share my thoughts. I hope I'm going through okay. I've got a lot going on my side of things, so just keep that in mind that I might be a bit slow on the uptake for the moment. It doesn't help that I'm kind of getting better from being sick. I've been sick all week in like the way that I would get migraines that would make it hard for me to concentrate and do stuff. And now I'm feeling way better. But now I've got my throat's getting sore, so I'm worried I'm going to lose my voice. So that's great. But yeah, thank you so much for being here today. Hope you enjoyed yourselves. If I'm looking at this live, it looks like the intro is like severely delayed from what I'm at, so I'm not sure why that is, but it might mean that I might just be delayed in my responses to you all. I'll do the best I can though. Frankly, it should be fine. We're probably gonna be here for a while, so sit back, relax, enjoy yourselves. And I'm gonna be going over this interestingly too. If you're here for some reason, like obviously this is second chapter, Legend of Heroes Trails to the Sky second chapter, continuation of the first one. So I'm probably not gonna be focusing too much on what was the core of the first game, which was essentially like the hero characters. I'll talk about them for sure. I'll talk about some of their arcs, but for a lot of the characters, they didn't really grow that much comparatively, and so I'm going to be focusing a lot on some of the newer content that came up. So we had a lot of very notable villains, some of the events that happened with the like different locations that we had to face, and then ultimately like some of the major plot points, which is what I'll be focusing primarily on. Now, naturally, of course, I'll talk about what happens with some of the characters, because there were moments where some main characters had some very important growth moments, or at the very least critical moments where they had engaged with their pasts. I'll talk about that, obviously, but I'm not going to sit and do like a massive discourse on each of the characters like Agat, Tita, Chloe, and all of them, like, just because I feel like we already did that. They'll come up, but if you're expecting me to do like a super in-depth like look into each of them as a character, I don't know if you'll be super happy with that per se, but I hope you'll still enjoy tonight. And of course, if you have something you want me to talk about specifically, just bring it up, put it up in chat. I probably will get back to it. It looks like where I am right now is just like the begin. Like you are like currently listening to me talk about like me setting this up and how scuffed it is. So that's the difference we're seeing here between like where you are, where I am. And it's weird because like normally I set up so there's like a 30-second delay or a minute delay, but it feels like you're way behind this time for some reason. So yeah, we'll have to see. Also, I can't just like not have ads playing anymore, which is weird. Normally it lets me say like, do you want to play ads or not? And I always say no, especially stuff like this. Now it says that like I can't, but I can like choose when the ads go up, so I can just not have ads go up and it should be about the same. It's just weird. YouTube, I think, changed some of their platform stuff recently. But yeah. Alright, so I'm going to go through my notes. First of all, though, I'm going to give over a summary. It's actually, a bit of it is in the description of the actual live stream, but my core reflections on the series right so far, I was saying to myself, I was like, does this game suffer being in the shadow of the former game? Video games in particular, but I feel like this happens a lot with books and movies. Sequels often struggle in the shadow of the great first opening act. And that can be a problem, because it can feel like you have something that's just a banger, and then it deteriorates and deteriorates, and eventually it feels like you can't be excited for that series anymore, because what it once was feels like it's died. And it doesn't even have to be like just from one to the second. It's just like over time, series can often feel like they do that. And that's always a concern. And I wonder if that will be essentially. I get the idea. A lot of people feel like Trails does that. I get the impression that most people are still quite happy with the later developments in the Trails series, but does it ever come close to that first experience of Trails in the Sky? And maybe not, but the beautiful thing about this is I feel like second chapter, it really doesn't suffer from that at all. If anything, it eclipses the first game in many ways, but I feel like there's a good reason for that. I think the biggest reason why that works that way is because it's very clear, even if without people like explaining in the past, like, oh, this is meant to be the same story, it's just broken up into two games because the two games like it was too long, it had to be broken up. Very so much like the Lord of the Rings, how it was intended to be one book, but it broke it up into three because the publishers didn't feel comfortable publishing in a massive novel like that. I think it's the same problem where it was really meant to be one game, but they had to break it up for like longevity and to have time to like work on it. And that kind of shows because the two parts don't feel like they eclipse each other or are competing with each other. It just feels like the same story. And so it's almost more like you have this like intense climax at the end of the first game, and then it kind of comes down a little bit as you kind of rebuild, but then it kind of keeps ramping back up again. And so by the end of the first half of the second game, it feels like it's right back up where it was before it left off in the first game, and then it just keeps going. Like, I'm talking about when you're going around solving all the problems around the different kingdoms, like, it feels like it's revamping back up to the heights of the first game, and then you get to the reveal of, like, the Liberl arc, and from there, it's just, like, insanity. But there's still, like, I feel like a half the game left. I don't think it's actually half, it's probably more like a third, but it feels like half the game, and that's amazing. So it's incredible to see and hear how that connection really works and just how impressive that is. And to be able to know for a fact that that is really like the heights that can be achieved with a good story arc, it's just phenomenal. So I can't say, like, I feel like it's not justifiable to try and say, like, oh, I like the first one better than the second one, or I like the second one better than the first one. I've heard both arguments before. I think they're the same story. I think you can't differentiate them because I don't feel like one works without the other completely. You can technically play the first game and never touch another one and have a satisfying story, which is really impressive. But there's so many loose ends left at the end of the first game, there's no way anyone could actually be content playing just the first one. Now, obviously, the second game does that as well. It feels like that there's lots of really fun little hooks that are left at the end for us to explore and, like, to know that there's a lot of story and wider world to, like, experience inside, like, the Legend of Heroes sagas. that are to come. But I also feel like if I push came to shove and like I never got to touch another one of these games ever again, the end of second chapter is satisfying enough that I could be content with that. I don't want to be content with that, but I could be. As opposed to the first game where if like that was just the end and I never went back, I would be so frustrated and upset because it's so clear that there was more resolution that had to be done. And I'll say that when we get this started off, the biggest reason for that is Estelle. Estelle, hands down, might be one of the best protagonists of any story I've ever read. Which is funny, because there's so many good stories I've read, and so many fantastic arcs, but a good example of that is Muv-Luv. I always champion Muv-Luv as one of the greatest stories I've ever, like, consumed and been a part of. And I'm so happy that it's been a part of my life. But then, I go back to, and I think about it, and I'm like, but I can't say that Takaru, as the main character and protagonist of that game, is a favorite character of mine. He's actually one of the more frustrating characters. I love the characters he's around far more than I like him. Estelle is definitely one of the best protagonists. Now, granted, I'm probably a bigger fan of some of the characters around Estelle more than Estelle herself. But as far as a main protagonist goes, she might be one of the best. Because she walks this really interesting line where she's not a self-insert type protagonist. She has her own character, her own arcs, her own interests, her own motivations. Yet I felt like I was in lockstep with her the entire time. And that's so funny too, because I've heard a lot of discussion. Sorry, I have a cough drop in my mouth to keep me going. I've seen a lot of people who say that they can really struggle connecting with a protagonist. And I also have heard a lot of people who try and counter arguments saying like why you shouldn't have a female lead because it can be hard for the majority male audience to connect with them. And like anytime I've heard that argument in the past like several months, I immediately just want to do like just a point. Be like, have you seen Legend of Heroes? Like, look at this. She's such a fantastic protagonist. I can't think of a single person who wouldn't be able to relate with her on the sense of like, you know where she's coming from. You see her story. You know what her motivations are. You want to see Estelle succeed. You want her to excel. And you feel like you're a participant in that. And that's part of the journey that makes this so wonderful. How can you not be so excited to have this wonderful character? I just want her to be everything she can be. And so there's so much in this story that carries it, but I feel like the greatest thing is Estelle. So I am going to be very curious to see how a story that isn't Estelle-centric will play out. I have a lot of faith in the writers and creators of the first and second chapters to be able to deliver good character development and to be able to translate that skill and that passion into new characters that I can also be passionate about. But that's a tall order. And I almost wonder if that's part of the magic that might get lost in translation down the line. Of, can you really maintain having such a solid character? And then it's also hard because there's definitely a part of me that almost hopes in the future that I can play a Legend of Heroes game that almost takes a Fire Emblem-like route where you get to be a character, but you kind of get to be a self-deterministic one. Like, it'd be really fun to be able to make a character that could be built to, like, I keep thinking of the Three Houses game, where you had a defined character that you played as that was integral to the story, whatever story you went down. But the choices you made determined the path you went down in the game, and you largely got to choose what kind of class that character was. You determined how that character fought in combat and developed their skills along that way. And I could almost see how fun would it be to be able to kind of make your own character in this game. Now, granted, you can customize your characters a lot, but I found that it became more of a shuffle of like, you built a team, not a character. You had your team, and that the team determined like what courts I slotted into which character, what kind of spells they could cast, because like it quickly became more about having coverage and proper defenses and healing. And so as the teammates shuffled, it became more of like, how do I maintain these critical like important character and casting infrastructures in order to make sure that I am capable of keeping up with what I need to do, rather than feeling like, oh, this is a character who's mastered this particular skill. Now, granted, they have those abilities that enhance that. A good example being Agat. Like, he's a burst damager. He's a glass cannon. His ability to give himself his supercharge, like pretty much at the drop of a hat, at the cost of his own health, is really fun. High risk, high reward type playstyle, and that's very unique to him. And it makes sense for his character, and I like how they have abilities that seem to line up with the characters and their arcs. But at the same time, wouldn't it be fun to be able to make your own character, a heroic character, and be able to define what kind of playstyle they would have based on how you want them to play? A great example of this is one of my favorite games of all time right now, that I played on my own that hasn't ever been featured on the channel, probably never will, is Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. I also really like the Kingmaker game, but Wrath of the Righteous is a superior game out of the two, in my opinion. Fantastic game, CRPG. If you like strategy games, you like RPGs, it's a really good one where it lets you craft your own character, where it feels like your decisions have an impact on the story and the way things play out. And also just being able to, but you get to have this like level of customization, and your role in the game is so determined by like your class and the way you play the class. I love that, and I almost wish I could have that here, because it'd be fun to play different builds, like spellcaster, or like can you construct your own glass cannon, big tanky character like Zin. Or in my personal opinion, I'd be super stoked to play somebody who does like a puppeteering thing, kind of like Ren does, where you have like a character and then they have like a summon that they work in tandem with. Now, obviously, the Puppet Mater, bit overkill, and we'll talk about that later, but the idea and the concept of like, wouldn't it be fun to play a class or to have a character that you got to play that was one of those puppet masters from the stories, which is really cool. I also say that about the world building in the game. It wasn't as kind of on the nose in the first game, but I do like how the supplementary stories that you read are often ways of organically and at the player's discretion giving access to exposition. The problem with exposition is it can be really ham-fisted and can feel very forced at times. But it can also be really important for someone who wants to understand how the world works. So having these like optional books that you can read that give you more insight into what's happening, how the world works, and what's going on, I love that. I think it's really important to be able to have these, like, the access to be able to feel like you can be involved in the world and understand how it works. And oftentimes in this game, the books that you would read were often precursors to understanding fundamental aspects of what you would end up facing. The puppet mastering was the clear one. Like, it had the story about the knight who learned how to master puppets, and then almost immediately afterwards we faced somebody who used those abilities and helped make that connection, being like, oh, I know what this, like, this is a thing, this is something that's in the universe, it doesn't come out of like a random left field. I should have guessed that was going to be a thing, and I love that. That's such a cool connection. Alright, so, enough waffling. Especially because I don't know how long my voice is going to last. So, I'm going to start breaking it down. I decided to go based on locations, because you visit all the locations in the nation, and I want to talk about them. But you visit them all twice. I'm going to kind of lump them all together, because I want to talk about, like, the first round, what happened, and the second time around when you went there, and kind of talk about the events. And I'll also end up talking about the characters that got involved in those stories specifically at the time. But we're going to focus on that. Yankee Canuck, thank you for posting. I see your comment. You admit some of the extra text was a bit much, but that's the thing too, is like, the nice thing about it is that at least it is like an optional digestible. You could skip it. And while you might miss out on some in-world context, it's not imperative to enjoying the story if you're just here to play the game. That, like, is nice. But it's also interesting, too, because, like, one of the biggest criticisms of something like Destiny, which is, like, the king game of having tons of interesting lore, but it never really like being in the game, where you had to like go to the website and read like essentially text blocks to give you like background information. That was not great, and one of the big reasons for that is it's not built into the game in any natural way. And in Destiny 2 they kind of fixed it, but they still didn't do a good job of it. And it was one of my personal gripes with the games, is that idea that I had to hunt for understanding. I had to hunt down lore if I wanted to know more about something, and I had to go out of my way to do so. Where in this game, the lore's handed to you, you just have to decide if you want to read it or not. If it's going to be disruptive to you and you don't find it that fun, then you don't need to bother. But if you want to immerse yourself like I did, it's a joy to read those things. And I also liked how a lot of them were staggered. Like the books like the, like what was it, like Jack? The story about like the card game and the epic kind of Western style. I liked how you'd get access to those throughout the story. It is unfortunate it was so easy to miss a few, but I just like the idea that like I got to kind of read like a sub novel as I went through the game, so it wasn't like a lore dump, which is what the Puppet Master one was, because it wasn't the Puppet Master, and there's another series that was like they were books that were just in the embassies, and so you could just sit and just read. That delivery was a bit much, but again, they were far more optional, and I think at least one of them was technically just the game that was in the first one. You just got it again if you want to see it and didn't want to miss it. Yakin Kaneki said, you forgot how were you able to read the Dawn Knight in this game? Was it a big lump? It was a big lump. It was in one of the embassies. I believe it was in the Erebonia embassy. You could go to the bookshelves in the library and read through the story. But it was a shorter story too. It was only like 4 books. So it was a big chunk of reading if you wanted to get into it. But it was accessible there. And that was how you got it. Which is great. Again, as someone who just loves lore, it was fine for me. And I also like and respect how they recognize though that it didn't need to be shoved down your throat. That the mystery around Ren could just be like taken at face value if necessary. But to understand that it's not like it was completely out of scope for the universe was also just nice. Yeah. And like you're also saying you feel the Dawn Knight should have been spread out. But hunting for 2 series is a bit much. Yeah, the other issue I feel like about the Dawn Knight is that because it is so lore related to like actual events in the game, it also might have been a deliberate choice, because I just talked about like the story, the Western story about Jack. I missed a few of those novels. I had no idea they were kind of hidden. So hiding something that was going to become so important to the lore also might have been part of the issue, where it's like, hey, if someone wants this information, let's make sure they're not going to miss it. Like, it's going to be readily available, and it's not going to be too difficult to get their hands on, where the Jack series is more of a kind of a bonus. So yeah, I feel like it's interesting. It's like how you do that, and the way you approach it as a writer is a challenge. But I like it. I think this game did it all right. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it's better than a lot of games when it comes to lore. Because there's also a lot of other games that get really preachy to you. Like, where they force you to watch a cutscene, or you have to listen to a character ramble. One of the funny examples of a bad way of doing this is Skyrim, where there's so much good lore that you can just find access to if you want it. They do such a good job of most of that. But when it came to like Alduin and the end of the world and the dragons and what the Dragonborn are, it felt like they just had to like really shove it down your throat. And so you get into these long, like the Greybeards or the Blades when you go and find the mural. It felt like there would be these like long stretches of 20-minute just like word vomit to you. And it's like, that's hard. It's hard to like take a character, especially when you're playing a game that's so usually action and self-deterministic, to then just sit down and have this lore dump. But it's clearly important. Like, what you're doing in that game when you're fighting the dragons and sucking in the souls makes no sense without that context. So I understand them needing it, but it's frustrating when it feels like you go from these open-ended, like I explore and learn about the world on my own terms, to I have to do things this way, or I will be completely out of the loop, and that sucks. All right, so now I'm gonna get into the meat and potatoes of this. By the way, it's funny because like I have the video going in the background. I think it's just a loop, by the way. I can switch the episode if it's getting really obnoxious. It's like funny though, because it's like I picked the episode because I'm like, oh, this episode's like a long one. It has some good content to it. Oh wait, maybe it's not a loop though, because like we've only been streaming for 30 minutes, and this episode's definitely like an hour and 30 minutes long. So I don't know. Anyway, just kind of amusing. So we're gonna start off. We started off the game. Ironically, we're in Rouen, which is kind of where the current footage is. So it's really funny because one of the downsides to this game is that because it is related to the first game and uses all the same set pieces, the first half of the game of second chapter blends in my mind with memories of the first game, and so I had to remind myself of some of the events that happened. Nesmontu, you said Sky the Third has a library where they put every book from first and second chapter. For those who missed them, I know I did. Yeah, I'm sure I'll spend some time in there. I wonder if I'll broadcast it as much, since or I probably would only broadcast any book series I completely missed, but if I covered the majority of them in the playthroughs, I probably won't showcase them, although I'll absolutely read them again. I just probably won't put it in the videos. But that's nice that they are making sure that, like, hey, you can still have access to all of this. In fact, I would argue that it would be a good idea for games like this to, when you beat the game, unlock like a little extra in the the intro of the game, like when you go to the main screen, that you could have an extra tab that pops out where you could then digest all the books on your own. It wouldn't contribute to like maybe an achievement of finding them in the game if they have achievements, but something that gives you access to every book that you might have missed, so you can read it on your own if necessary after you've beaten it. And Bozo DeLuffy says, doesn't Riviera have like 3 and 9? I missed them in CS4, and I know that they're required reading. Alright, it's in the main menu. Yeah, okay, so yeah, essentially it sounds like in the future they do that. And so yeah, I imagine that that's probably something that was community feedback to the writers, saying like, hey, sometimes I don't have the time or I'm meticulous enough to catch everything. I'd like to have access to it all eventually, and so in the future it sounds like they've done that. So that's really good. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. So Rouen. When we first came back here, remember, one thing that's kind of cool about this game was the idea that you got to choose if you went with Agat or Shara, like for the first like half of the game, or like third of the game. I don't know. The amount of time it took for each section of the game in my head doesn't make sense. Like, it's all very like muddled. So in Rouen though, like I went with Agat, which I actually think was a good choice. I can see why. Lore-wise, it made more sense to do a lot of travel with Agat in the early game. I also think it made sense for the character, because I also felt like Agat was the character I felt the least bonded to from the first game. And so I liked the opportunity to be able to really get to know him as a character and see him outside of the tough guy with a heart of gold like kind of trope that he was kind of slotted into at first. Because there is so much more to his character, and I feel like a lot of it didn't get explored in the first game. Nesmontu, you're kind of wrapping up the conversation about like the out-of-book texts or in-book text. You said that you think there's a physical copy of the book and physical Riviera, but 3 and 9 is probably the only book in the series that's really required, so it makes sense to go further with it. Okay, I'll have to try and remember that, but it could be a while before I get there. But yeah, anyway. The music kicking in, yeah. So, Rouen. Rouen's interesting because like it's very... I just realized that we're showcasing like gambling. I did that for like such a long time. It did not communicate in the video. I really was just trying to like make it big, and so that's why I went to the roulette table. I wasn't doing roulette for a while, but like the card game was just taking so long. I was just like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna do the high stakes one. If I get lucky, awesome. And if I lose all my money, I'm not gonna bother. And so I showed like the last few bets that I'd make. Anyway, so Ruan, Blue Blanc was the main antagonist there, and he's interesting, isn't he? It's ironic because we got hints of him in the first game with the Phantom Thief. Like, the whole idea of, like, the Phantom Thief stealing the chandelier. Like, it's funny because at the time I was like, oh, I wonder if we're going to see more of him. And then I got so distracted by all the big events that happened, I completely forgot that, like, that was kind of like this, like, loose end that would be really obnoxious if you didn't have the second game and you, like, went back and you thought about it. You'd be like, what the heck was that all about? And then, like, you finally get the payoff here. Kind of weird that his like super like mysterious ability he was working with was like holograms that like floated around like a ghost. But I wonder if that's also something that's going to be brought up as a potential like technology that they utilize in the future. Because like if you think about it, we already were seeing like the idea of shadow clones that feel very physical. That became a very prominent thing even in this game. And so like what if that's taken to an extreme in the future, where shadow clones are almost like the new version of puppets, but they can be indistinguishable from real people. And that's going to become a much bigger problem in the future. So I could see that being a thing that we talk about. But regardless of that, it was kind of fun seeing like a prankster sent in their full element of like he's actually like being an antagonist and he's antagonizing an entire city and surrounding countryside. It's so Blue Blanc. His obsession with Chloe was okay. It's one of those things where, like, in hindsight, especially like as the story went on, I got frustrated because of all the members of all the cast and all the characters. In the end, the depressing fact was that the one that most reminded me of me was Blue Blanc, and I hate that because he's so obnoxious, and it just says a lot about how I view myself, I think. But I was like, as it went on, like his whole idea of like he just has a lot of power and he's kind of a villain mostly because he's bored doing normal stuff and he likes like learning new things and being on the cutting edge. And so and also like it's uncomfortable how much of a fan he is of Chloe, because I am also a huge fan of Chloe, and so I was like, I don't want to relate to this guy because he's also one of the more like he's one of the less interesting of the enforcers, and so why am I vibing with this guy so hard? But even later on, there's a whole arc with Joshua. Well, we'll talk about this in detail when I talk about the finale, but Joshua even calls him out saying like, hey, like of all the enforcers, you have like the least stakes in what's going on here. Why are you even here? So I'm curious of Blue Blanc, I could see Blue Blanc being a scarier villain if he feels more, if he has more stakes in the race, if there's more going on that he feels more like impacted by, or like he's more invested in, because it did feel like his whole involvement in this was a kind of a whim. Also, do Luffy, you say I like how Blue Blanc and Oliver argue about real beauty. Yeah, I also do like how a lot of the enforcers are direct foils of people in our party. And not just foils per se, but they're also like emotionally connected to them somehow. Blue Blanc and Oliver's bond is the least like direct, but I do love how they're almost like a good and evil version of each other. And so I hope that they get to face off again in the future. And what I actually think would happen would be really fun is what if inadvertently in the future they end up allies? That would be hilarious if they ended up having to work together. But yeah, their relationship is very interesting. But his time in Ruan is very odd, and it's also like the least like directly offensive, if I recall. Like, it's obnoxious what he's doing. He's causing panic and turmoil during a time when like people need to go out and be voting and stuff. But when push came to shove, it wasn't like he was being truly like destructive, not like the other enforcers. But Ruan during the shutdown phenomenon is really interesting because it really grinds their entire economy to a halt. And I feel like while everyone was in trouble during the shutdown phenomena, Ruan was the most dire. Where it's like, if this got, like, the longer this went on, it was already making it difficult for people just trying to, like, you know, see people who happen to be on the other side of the bridge. Because normally, crossing the strait, not a big deal. Then it became this huge deal. And that, like, was tearing families apart, communities apart. If that had gone on too long, not only would the economy have collapsed, but you might have had to split Rouen in essentially 2 towns. Because realistically, the 2 halves were so different from each other, you couldn't really argue that they'd be able to function, like, anymore. So it really shut them down. And then, oh my gosh, the Royal Academy takeover. That was one of the best arcs in the entire game. And I loved it for 2 reasons. Number 1, I didn't say it as much at the time. As frustrating as it was to limit the amount of casting you could do, especially as you gave away the 0 like field generators that let you keep using your orbals, and you slowly lost access to your arts. That I love when a game does that, because you get so used to relying on certain mechanics when the games take them away, and it forces you to be creative with other aspects of the game that you know, but maybe aren't interacting with as much because you're leaning on other things. It really makes you reassess your team build-up, your strategy, and it really kind of made me become more cognizant of the sea crafts, and what they could do, and how normally I didn't spend much time with Xin or Agat, but they became critical to the time in the game when I had almost no access to arts, which was really cool. Like, I think it's fun when done right, when a game gives you a lot to work with and then takes some of it away to allow you to be creative with it. It's why one of my favorite expansions, at least in theory, with games like, a good example is Fallout 3. One of my favorite expansions of Fallout 3 is the Pit, because you typically have a high level character, like your character that you beat the game with, and so you've got all this great gear, you have these great weapons, and then the premise is that you have to, like, infiltrate this area, and part of infiltrating is you have to be a slave, and to be a slave you can't have any things of value, and so you get introduced into a high level area with all your weapons and armor taken, and you have to start from scratch. Unfortunately, they didn't deliver very well in that game, because really quickly they just give you weapons and give you armor, but the idea of, like, taking away some of your strength and limiting you so that you can try and explore the game's mechanics in different ways is something I think is very powerful. And as much as it at the time can be frustrating, in hindsight, it's some of my favorite parts in the game. And so, like, the takeover of the Academy, not only narratively was really impactful, but going into it without being able to access a lot of my strongest abilities and going into a situation that felt very overwhelming was just so good. It felt so powerful. Absolutely was phenomenally done. I'm such a big fan of that arc because it was a challenge, and because I couldn't approach it guns blazing. I had to be careful. I had to be meticulous. I had to watch my equipment and watch my my stats, like my health and everything. And it even limited the characters you could bring with you. Now, granted, I got to bring pretty much everybody I wanted with me, but I remember at that time I didn't have Chloe. I couldn't have Chloe with me. She was, like, for the majority of the game, she's always been a core member because of just her spellcasting power and her, like, just, she's so slated for healing because of her water, like, locked spell, like, slots. And she just became so, I became so dependent on her. Like, that being one of the additional restrictions was that she wasn't a companion at the time, and I had to rely on other people. It was good for me. It was good for me to stretch myself like that. So, as a player, I loved it. And also, being able to go back to the Academy, and, like, how our reunion with a lot of those characters was in, like, essentially a terrorist hostage situation was incredible. Such a fun way to get involved in that part of the story and to reacquaint myself there. And then Gilbert. He's the best worst villain I think I've ever seen. Most of the time, you have joke villains like that, and they're literally jokes, both mechanically and systematically. And it's funny because he is too, but at the same time, he also felt like a threat. He took a person hostage, and like that's something that you can't really joke about. While he was very like kind of goofy in combat, in his like, especially his special attack where he runs up and essentially slaps you around and doesn't do much damage. It's such a fun addition. But the fact that he also brings Ouroboros like machines that genuinely are terrifying and difficult. And so the fight wasn't like a pushover. He was a pushover, but the fight was still a challenge. And it's a great blend of how to have a joke character, but still give them teeth and help them feel like they are impactful to the story and that you can't just take them too lightly. It wasn't because they had any skill. Like, Gilbert didn't have anything about him that was truly notable other than how goofy he was, but he would bring to the fights something that was genuinely terrifying. I also think it's funny too, because like, what a good job. From the first game, he was an important character. I completely forgot about him within seconds of like leaving Rouen when I left, like after like we arrested the mayor. But then to have him come back here and make such an impression is such a, again, it's one of those testaments to like just how good the writers are to take like a nothing character who is essentially a joke and make him one of the most impactful characters and memorable for me in this game. Is so cool. And the fact that he wasn't a one and done, that he's still a member of Ouroboros, that he still came back and tried to get his revenge, and that I'm sure he's going to be back again in the future. It's amazing. Isaac got West cooked. You get waged like what looks like one of those big sticky slap hand toys. Hello, good to see you. Alright, let's move on for Rouen. Really good stuff. Let's go to Zeiss. Now, Zeiss was interesting because in the first game, Zeiss was like a critical sector. Not only did it help us like really understand orbital technology, advancement, introduce us to the professor, but then there's the whole subplot in the first game with the professor's kidnapping, the revelation of like a conspiracy, and like how like the movements in the conspiracy in the government were starting to directly affect us, made Zeiss feel really impactful. In this game, Zeiss was a bit more of a backseat. Not in a bad way, but it wasn't as prominent, if you could think about it. And that's okay. I feel like Zeiss had its confrontations. I mean, the earthquakes was interesting, but it was what overshadowed all of it was actually Walter. He was the first villain I think I've truly seen in this game who genuinely was terrifying. Like, Colonel Richard was scary because of what he was capable of doing and what he almost did. But in the end, we kind of knew he was like a misguided character. And then the professor, Weissman, he was so mysterious that even though he was terrifying for what he was capable of and his influence on like Joshua, he still was so mysterious. He didn't have a whole lot of like impact at the time. But when we get introduced to Walter, like, it's very clear he does not care about who he hurts. And his interactions and his willingness to kill, and even his backstory of how he has like committed like murder for very like kind of ephemeral reasons, makes him one of the first people where it's like, oh, like this guy's bad news. This guy is like a borderline serial killer, and the only reason why he probably hasn't is because he's sated by like being involved with Ouroboros. But if he weren't with Ouroboros, I could have seen him becoming just a genuine serial killer, because he seems to revel in causing pain and eventually watching people die. Like, he enjoys that process so much. That's terrifying. So he is still one of the enforcers that I'm most like horrified by. I kind of wish, if there's any enforcer I wish had a genuine conclusion, like had been maybe like truly eliminated, I wanted it to be him. But I get the feeling we're going to see every enforcer in the future, that they're like the quote too strong to die, so they're going to be antagonists for a long time. But we should talk about like the earthquakes. The earthquakes were scary, but not super bad. Like the fact they were building and getting stronger was kind of concerning. But even then, most of the time, it was just kind of like a mild annoyance for the Zeiss area. What was scary though were the underground worms. Like the way that they built those games in that encounter to have multiple enemies, but punishing you for striking them, because you did big AOE's, which are usually the solution to fighting lots of enemies at once. They would all do their own AOE, and it would often like stack. That was crazy and terrifyingly impressive, but also very, very cool. Just to see that kind of relationship, and then the how do you explain it? The game and the creators really starting to push things. Because like it felt like in the first game, like there was challenges, sure, but it was mostly teaching you how the mechanics worked in the game and helping you like kind of overcome challenges by slowly building up your power. Second chapter was really good about taking established things and being able to make it feel like, oh, now you can't use the same approaches to these problems anymore, so what are you gonna do? I loved that. I did love that. And I think the earthquake worms were a good example of that. It is funny too, because like there is the much bigger fight with them later on, and it is one of the tougher fights in like the whole game. But at the same time, it also wasn't as bad as I expected it would be, because our damage output at that point was so high that even though like, because like I changed my build and I just focused all my my AOE spell casting and all AOE abilities. And by doing that and stacking them all, we were able to kill them before they could retaliate, which is also kind of fun to see, because the worm fight with Walter in the cave was probably one of the most consistently close. I had to fight that battle I think twice, but the second time I nearly was like out of resources realistically, besides like just spamming items. So well done. It's also that whole sequence is the GIF that popped up in the Discord that people were like, I can finally show this now, because I guess like that's something I'll need to go and look for, because apparently there's like a small like animation of like Legend of Hero Trails in the Sky, and everyone said that it was not super well done, but there's that like the GIF clip, those clips from it, which is like Estelle rushing at Walter just trying to strike at him, and he just like casually kicks her in midair. Like, it looks awful, but like you gotta admit, like that's like one of those like kind of funny moments. So really, really well done, and like it's very memorable. That's gonna live rent free in my head for a while. The other thing about it is the shutdown for Zeiss. Like, understandably, the shutdown affected everything that they're working on, including their research, but it felt like they were able to kind of keep their heads. And so it felt like the shutdown phenomena, if it went long, was going to be problematic. But even the hot spring, we casually took the gas-fueled engine, got the hot springs going again. It felt like of all the areas, Zeiss was actually on the road to like long-term recovery, especially because like it wasn't too long before the professor was able to start producing like the zero field generators that was going to get things back up and running. So even if for some reason the phenomena hadn't gone away, and say we were able to avoid war, but the phenomena stayed for long term, I feel like the professor in a few weeks was going to be able to get most things back up and running. So Zeiss was going to be fine. It was worrying at the time, but Zeiss was okay. And then of course we got Tita there, but like that's the thing, is like at this point I feel like my guess, obviously I have a lot of hindsight I can pull from the fact that there are so many future games and that the games take place in the years to come. I think Tita is going to be getting a lot more character growth in the future. Is she going to be a main character or playing a character like in the game? Is she going to be a companion character? I don't know. I don't know if I want to know. Like, I don't want spoils, obviously, but even if she's not, I imagine a lot of her character growth is in the future, because the idea is that she's a kid. She still has a lot to do, and like the first game, she had a lot of growth but her growth there was like kind of stepping up and becoming more of an adult, where she couldn't expect herself to be just treated like a kid, and she like was willing to risk her life to take care of the people she cared about. Her and Agat's relationship is very sweet, At the minute, it's still in the very like sibling area. Even with the like the more powerful feelings, like subtext that's going on with Tita, which totally get. I mean, sometimes you don't control who your first real crush is, and oftentimes it's a figure of authority. It's the people who take advantage of that becomes problematic. But I wonder if that's something that they'll follow through with and try and like make a thing as she gets older, or if that's going to be just like a first crush that kind of just devolves into what normally happens, which is like a brother-sister type of relationship. I'll have to see how that plays out. She is very adorable though. Her interactions with Agat being one thing, but then just her interactions with Chloe and Estelle, and like how she kind of got pseudo-adopted by everybody. It's just such a sweet thing, and it's very fun to see. I'm such a huge fan of just like that arc in general, and just how powerful that whole experience was for her. But again, I feel like in this game she didn't grow a whole lot. It was more of just like kind of a culmination of her relationship, like as a character, rather than just a kid with a cannon who just is kind of tagging along. So I really liked that. I liked how she kind of solidified herself in her role, and she'll actually become a lot more important in the Grancel arc. So, and that's actually what we're going to talk about next. Although I think I might have to switch this video soon. I think it's almost done, so I might pull up a different one. So if we go back to the slides, like, that's why. But Grancel, now for me, Grancel was a big pivot moment, and it's probably my favorite arc because of how involved I got personally. So you go to the Grancel, like things are kind of rough there. There's mysterious actions, but the mystery there was Ren, like this abandoned child, and like, oh, her parents are missing. I was like, ooh, intrigue. Maybe Ouroboros kidnapped her parents or something. And like, with like, it kind of introduces what was it? It's not like, what's the place she came from? It was really prominent at that time. Then it got lost in the sauce afterwards. But she's supposed to be from that small like township between the kind of like a miniature version of Liberl, where it's like a small like city-state, like completely surrounded by the Calvert Republic and the Empire. But that kind of crossroads area where she supposedly is from, and that like exploring the city, trying to figure out where the kidnapping came from, and like getting these tiny little hints about like, oh yeah, I saw them, they came to pray at the church, but there's something odd about them, or like the way they talked, they kind of seemed off. And like, it's funny because like, it really, my assumption was, oh, they were under pressure, under threat, they were trying to like put on a brave face around their daughter, but like they were secretly like really stressed out. And then the grand reveal of like, no, they weren't real. They weren't people. And people were picking up on that. And like, oh, that was such a cool twist. And just having Ren. I think having a child character becoming a villain is such a hard thing to pull off, right? Most of the time when I've seen it, it's been really just disappointing. And so to see it executed so well genuinely was phenomenal. She won my heart. I was so invested in her as a character, and to have her reveal that she's an enemy that works with Ouroboros, and how freaking strong she was, and her ability to manipulate like the intelligence division to continue to do their work and try and undercut and try and do a second coup essentially with the tank, was just, it was such a phenomenal story arc. I was blown away by that section. And so I said this before, I did my favorite characters list. I didn't put Ren in that list when I did like my favorite characters from the whole channel. But if I had to put my favorite characters from this series, Chloe's still number 1, and Estelle's right up there with her, but right next to Estelle is Ren. I think Ren might be my favorite character of the entire series if we get to explore more about her, which it certainly implies is going to happen in the future. Because I find her story, her character, and her motivations so fascinating. And while she's a horrifying little murder machine, I kind of got that ray of hope that she's not super just brainwashed or being controlled. I was worried that she was going to be like a Joshua, where she was going to be like, if she tried to break away, that she might be just like, you know, puppeted essentially. But I feel like she wouldn't. And I think they tried to establish that that wouldn't be the case. And so if she is like allowed to be on her own and she sets her own path, I'm not convinced that she's just going to become a hero. I don't know. She might be too jaded to become something like a bracer. Or if she became a bracer, that she would be one because she wants to, like, I want to help people. Like, I could see her, like, turning away from, like, the path of evil and instead turning down the path of, like, I want to be comfortable and successful. Like, I want to have money. I want to have fame. I want to have, like, the ability to be self-deterministic. Like, that's her real goal. Like, she'll talk about how, like, oh, yeah, like, I'll just do it for the money. But in reality, she just wants to have, like, all the power. And she doesn't want to feel like she's being controlled by other people or circumstances. Because her whole childhood was about being forcibly controlled. Having things ripped away from her. Having no ability to make choices. And watching people suffer that she cared about. And it turned into this very jaded creature. And she's also really, really strong. So you take that combination, and it makes her willing to do terrible things. The thing that made me sad was how bloodthirsty she got towards the end. Like when she was fighting us, when she sounded like she genuinely just wanted to kill us still. She's like, I just want to kill you, because it makes these weird feelings go away. And like, that's scary. And probably one of my biggest barriers to liking her as a character would be like if she just goes for full murder hobo. But the glimmer that we got at the end is so exciting for me. I'm so excited to see where she goes in the future. I really, really hope that she gets to be a prominent character in future games, because I want to see her come back. Real quick, I kind of casually mentioned it, but like the whole secondary like rising and a coup attempt by the intelligence division members that got away, the tank that got superpowered, that was a really intense fight, and that was one of the that was really challenging, because that was like a 2-layered boss fight, and I wasn't expecting that, so I used a lot of my resources in the first round, and then the second round, which was harder, I had kind of exhausted myself, and so that was one of the first, like, oh, like, these fights aren't going to be messing around anymore. Was really intense. So I'm really happy with that, though. Like, I enjoyed that sequence in general, but it kind of was like that wake-up call for me. It was Grancel. I was like, oh, like, you really need to be careful here. You need to take things step by step. And you need to get into these situations and fights expecting it to be a challenge, and that's really good. Oh, yeah. So, during the shutdown, there are 2 things that happened in that period. First of all was Chloe and her finally committing to accepting, like, her heritage. I kind of loved how the queen, for her sake, kept her, like, gave her the option. The queen had, like, essentially she had the burden of potentially being the next, like, ruler. It was like that burden, but it explored it in a way that a lot of stories don't, because a lot of stories will do things like, oh, the royal, like, heir, like, they have to take up that role, even if they don't want to. For her, she genuinely could have walked away from it. The queen, like, obviously it would have been, like, hard if she had, but the queen was willing to be like, hey, look, like, you have your agency. You're not weren't necessarily supposed to be the one, and there's technically other options, but the queen was like, I truly believe you're the best for this. And so I just love that story arc for her in here, accepting her responsibility, though I do think it means that Chloe's I feel like Chloe's very unlikely to be a playable character in the future, because she has responsibilities now. Maybe I'll be surprised, but I could see her being a secondary side character now in the future of the series, because, you know, she can't be a bracer. She can't go traveling around. She has her duties. But, man, what a great character she is. Still my top character for the game, absolutely. And I'm happy for her. I think Liberl's in good hands. She's gonna be great at ruling that kingdom. So yeah, her decision and the decision she makes at that time in the Grancel arc, very powerful. I also like how she finally has her own, like, once she accepted it, she blended her two identities. Like, there's Chloe the student, and there's Chloe Claudia the princess, but she's blending them together. So you see her in the end, her new outfit, but she maintains her old hairstyle that she enjoys from school. Like, I think she looks really good with long hair, but like she clearly like has her personal style that she prefers, and awesome. She's fantastic with that too. It's just like one of those things where it's like, I liked how she had that double life, and then she fuses them together in a very physical manifestation of the like psychological change that she took upon herself. Very cool, very well done. But in the Castle Assault, I also want to talk about how like this series might have the same problem that I see with my, well, it was D&D, but now we do Pathfinder campaigns. I love playing in these worlds and making up these stories and everything, but one of the issues is scale. In a world where you can have 4 or 5 people who can walk up to a castle, punch down the stone doors, walk through a city full of military people, obliterating them all, and just walk in and kidnap the queen and her heir in like probably 30 minutes without even like a risk. Like, that's the thing, it's like crazy. It's like, you can argue that modern special ops can do that, but they're still human. They can still get taken down by one other soldier with a bullet who gets a good shot off, you know? But to have it be where they literally are like untouchable demigods who can just walk in and just take over. Like, yeah, they were chased away in the end, but think about the resources that had to be pulled together, that had to happen to be able to collectively get together in order to even drive them off. And they even pointed out at the time, they were like, they weren't concerned that they would lose. They were confident they could win, but they were worried one of them could get captured, and that was too high a risk. It's just interesting. It's such an interesting concept, and like, it makes it feel like, what's even the point of armies when you can have one-man armies who apparently could just take down over entire kingdoms if they wanted to? It's like, it starts feeling like, what are everyone else just essentially sheep in this world? So I don't know. For me in my writing, when it comes to like my tabletop game, I actually have written in-universe reasons why some people are these crazy powerful heroes who can do these incredible feats of aptitude, and how most people are just normal people. Because the way that it's currently written in D&D and Pathfinder is that technically anybody can become a hero if they just try. And it's like, I mean, sure, technically most of us could become like a scientist if we dedicate ourselves to studying, or we could become an MMA fighter if we dedicate ourselves to physical like aptitude. Would we be the best? Probably not, but we could be functional. But like, that's such a different scale of power and ability to what we see in something like in a fantasy game or story like this one, where that scale is just so impressively massive and overwhelming. Excuse me, that cough is still like fighting me. It's really crazy to imagine that. So that Castle Assault was very impactful, but I feel like it was a good example of one of the greatest disservices of having characters like Ouroboros. It just feels way too OP, and it starts feeling like, what's the point of like half the stuff that's happening in this world if they can just be obliterated that quickly? Anyway, moving on from Grancel to Roland. Roland was really fun because coming back to it, basically both times towards the end of like the loops around the kingdom, when it was our starting area, was I think a great idea of like coming back. It almost reminded me, especially the first time coming back, even like dealing with like the mist and stuff, coming back, it reminded me of in Lord of the Rings, in like the Return of the King. At the end, like they have the sequence where the hobbits return to the Shire, and it's like Sam, Frodo, Pippin, and Merry, and they're like on ponies, like with these like massive amounts of like of loot and like gear. They have these like powerful swords, and they have all these like garb of like representing these different nations from like around the country, and they come walking in, and like everyone like watches them. They look like kings, like riding into like a countryside village, and just like that kind of like, wow, something definitely happened. But most people still just seeing them as who they are. That was the Roland feel for me. It's like we came back, we're like, wow, we're so much stronger, we're so much more capable, we know what we're doing, we're not just like a couple dumb kids anymore. And then like you go back through and everyone's like, oh wow, like you've really grown, but you're still that little Estelle who used to steal snack cakes off the table, and are you still falling asleep during your lectures, Estelle? And like those cute little like moments where it's like it kept them grounded, and I loved it. And also that's why like the mist was one of the least like offensive, aggressive things. Like it stopped the airship flight, and some people fell into dreams. But because these people who were in dreams were like childhood friends for Estelle, it made the stakes a lot higher, and so that was really fun. But the enemy there, she was my least favorite enforcer. Luciola. I always forget her name too. I have to write it down. Luciola, she was the least interesting enforcer to me. I think her story was interesting. Like, the fact that she was like a pseudo sister / mom for Shara, and how she murdered the guy she loved, which was crazy. But like, there's a lot of mystery built around her. But first of all, I found that her illusions were obnoxious. Like, the whole like walking through the forest and getting lost in it was annoying. The dreams were really like kind of scary, but like in a very like kind of like frustrating kind of way, rather than like an actual threat. And then her motivation was also one of the weaker of the enforcers. Like, I couldn't stand that things were going to change, and so I killed him and made them change anyway. It's like, at least Walter, it made sense with his story, which we'll talk about in a bit. But like his background, like when it got revealed, it was like, okay, it was stupid, but I get why you made your choices that you did. But for her, I just don't understand. I do not understand how she decided that that was the course of action that she should take, and that she somehow was justified in it. Like, to the end, like she talked about it like she had regret. But when push came to shove, she's in a way felt like she'd still like done it the right thing. And it was only when like Shara talks to her about it. Like, okay, I'll save that conversation for a bit, because we're gonna do the wrap-ups at the tower when we talk about the tower. She frustrated me of all the enforcers, because I felt like there could have been her story could have been done better. The one thing I loved was when Estelle got sent into her dream, we really got to have an actual interaction with a pseudo Lena Bright, you know, Estelle's mom, because she's been such a strong like undercurrent motivation for Estelle. Because she died saving Estelle's life. She wants to be a hero, not just like her dad, but almost more like her mom. Like, her dad is, you know, one of the most powerful people in the world, basically. And she's obviously inspired by him and following in his footsteps, which is why she learned how to wield the staff, which is based on the weapon that he wielded. But he's not the motivation for her to want to be a bracer and to help people. It was her mom. And so, even though it was a vision, being able to have her have that kind of like interaction with a vision version of her mom was really, really cool. And character growth wise was such a big moment for Estelle. I loved it. It was absolutely one of the best things I've ever seen for this whole series. So whilst a lot of the Roland arcs were kind of like meh, that aspect of it for Estelle and her character growth was so phenomenal. I was blown away by it. I loved it. I also liked how, in the midst of all the chaos, they had the wedding between those two characters. I also really loved how, like, the shop guy and, like, the old lady who spent the first game, like, traveling around looking for a wife for her son, accidentally brings Kitty home from the capital. she didn't even like her that much, but she like just brought her home on account of a whim. And now it's like pretty clear that those two are gonna end up together. I loved that. That was so fun and adorable, and I hope we get to see them in the future games, even as like really like vague like side characters. I just thought that was really fun. Yeah. So all in all, like Roland as an area was very like comfort food. It was very much like comfort food. It's this place like I'm very like. I love the feel of it after it's all said and done. When we came back, it was like, it felt good. Excuse me. All right. Now finally Bose. Bose is interesting because, again, like Roland, because it was the second area we explored in the first game, it felt like it got a lot more of a prominent place. But when it came to plot, it probably was one of the most impactful. First of all, it has like Leonhard make his appearance, but it's funny because like Leonhard wasn't actually the antagonist; it was the dragon. So they bring the dragon and collapse the marketplace, and like that was like essentially the city got assaulted. It's like it got bombed, and they even talk about how like similar it was to when they got attacked by at the beginning of the 100 Days War. And then you also go up into Revenue, and you see it gets attacked. Like the houses may have been there, but the livelihood, the orchards were just burned to the ground. And also really getting to finally understand Agat's like history, like how about his sister Micha, how she died, and how like that like really just ruined his life, and just like really like the destruction from the war was always hinted at, but then to see it manifest and to see like the effects of it directly, because like the destruction of the orchard by the dragon essentially brought up all the PTSD and the terrible like feelings like at the time that happened at the time was so like impactful for me that it really was like it was such a turning point in the story, because the stakes became so much more real. Like in all the areas, all the enforcers were scary and they did terrible things that threatened livelihoods, but I felt like finally in Bose, we really were introduced to like just how devastating things could be and how easily things turn to being really, really, really bad. And so that was just incredible. Horrifying, but incredible. So I like the scope of it. And then of course my favorite side characters, Mayor Maybell and Lilla. I love them. Like Mayor Maybell is probably one of my favorite side characters for sure, and I hope we get to see more of those two in the future. I want to see, like, is their relationship more than just like, you know, childhood friends? Like it feels like there's like it feels like there's like little hints it could be, and I'm curious if they explore that or not. But regardless, I just think Maybell's fantastic as a character. Lilla's backstory was really fun. Like being able to try and connect her with her like estranged family that she didn't even realize were still around. Just beautiful. So yeah, I really liked Bose. And then in the shutdowns, like not only did they have the marketplace get destroyed and they just barely fixed it, and then the shutdown phenomena occurs. And like it's just like, man, Bose, it just like they had it rough. But I think it was really cool to see how they came together. And I also liked how the businessmen like easily were motivated to take advantage of the situation to profit, to make massive profits. But after talking with Maybell and thinking about it, they're like, you know what? Yeah, maybe short-term gains sacrificed at the expense of our clients aren't worth the long-term like bitterness that would come from it. And man, I wish modern businesses would approach things like that. I'm tired of just getting bent over the bar every time something happens. I mean, a good example of that is food prices. Like, yeah, I understand that swings in the market and changes when things like with the COVID lockdown, like it like made food harder to access and made it more expensive. But it's like, it feels like after things settled down, they just used it as an excuse to keep prices up or to make them even higher. Inflation was the same thing. Like we had a spike in inflation, so all the prices went up, and then they just kept them up there, even though I'm pretty sure they don't need to, but it makes the profits go up. So it's like, yeah, let's just take advantage of everyone, because it sucks. I want to believe in business people like the ones we see in Bose. Alright, and now to kind of start winding things down, we're gonna talk about the Liber arc. The Liber arc kind of came out of nowhere, but I love it for that. Actually, it literally came out of nowhere, didn't it? But had the towers activating, and like we're going to shut them down. And man, it was really frustrating because like knowing, like none of the characters had put two and two together really, but I was like pretty clear, especially after the first tower. So it's like we're not actually stopping them. We're there just witnessing what they're doing. We're not actually fixing anything here, really. It's like, ugh, that's like it sucks. But oh well, I mean, it is what it is. But like the Liber arc showing up, the moment was so powerful. I don't know if you know, but if you're watching this, when I posted it, I made a short that I posted and linked in the episode that the Liber arc appears, or at least the episode afterwards. But I didn't post this publicly because it was too much of a spoiler. But I, when the sequence is showcased where the Liber arc has made its appearance, it's such a powerful moment. But in my head, I couldn't help but also think of the it's from Dragon Ball. Oh crap! I'm brain farting hard here. It's Zero Instinct, Ultra Instinct, like the revelation of true Ultra Instinct during like the tournament. And like that moment and the music for that moment was like it came to mind, and so I actually put it together. I spliced the scene of the Liber arc appearing with the music from Ultra Instinct, and I think it was a beautiful combo. But yeah, so the Liber arc appears, shuts down all the like technology in the whole area. That was just insane. The political ramifications were was insane too. Like the horrifying realization when the Arbonians like had steam powered tanks that they had like resupplied and readied up, so as soon as like the phenomena happened, that they were able to mobilize essentially an entire army of equipment that was ready and capable of functioning properly into Liberl to essentially to try and essentially do a rapid blitzkrieg style conquering of it again. And how close that got, and in fact, without Oliver directly interceding, would have probably happened, is horrifying. Like how close that came to just a full like hostile takeover. That was horrifying, and how ready they were for it is like also implies like so much. Like, man, the corruption and the influence of Ouroboros and the Empire. I like would not be surprised if that's going to be major story points for like future games. I try not to see spoilers. I think Legend of Heroes Cold Trails and like Cold Steel, I think it's called, is supposed to take place like in the Empire. And so if that's the case, I'm guessing that we're going to be seeing the fallout of like the people and these like the choices and these like leaders that they've been making is going to be kind of manifest. So we'll have to see. I don't know, it'll be interesting. But yeah, so it shows up. We managed to fly up and crash onto it. I thought it was odd. Exploring the city was really cool, but it was really like, it left a lot of big unanswered questions. If technology was that advanced way in the past, like, why did we lose all that technology when we abandoned the Ark and like locked it away? Like, it kind of implied that the people gave up the technology and like tried to kind of have a resettled life, but it feels like they lost the technology, and so that feels less deliberate and more of like they literally like became so attached to the Liber arc just taking care of everything that they almost like lost all their scientists and their engineers. And so when they abandoned it, even though they were able to build like the towers and the device, the underground bunker that were eventually would lock the city away, it's like they purposely like forgot how to do all that. And it's like I don't understand why they made that choice. It'll be really interesting to see if that gets explained in the future, or if that's something that's just lost the time to like Did they just think that the technology was too dangerous? And then, I don't know, but because at the same time, like even the records, like Chloe's ancestor, like admitted like someday that the Liberl Arc would probably be brought back. She's like, I hope our future descendants, when that inevitably happens, I hope they make the right choice. It's like, okay, but then why hide all that information of how that stuff works? The best guess I can think of is that the church hoards it. Like I said, like they remind me of the Brotherhood of Steel and Fallout. This like they hoard like the information about the these ancient relics. They hoard the relics and they hoard how to use them. It's like clear they can use them. And so like, what was the church like built to maintain knowledge of how the technology worked in preparation for the days when it would be re-unleashed? It's like that's so it's such an interesting concept. I don't know how I feel about it. I imagine a lot of how I feel about it will come down to how like it's explored now that like we understand that like that's the relationship at least somewhat. I imagine it'll make more sense in the future. I hope it does, because that's definitely one of the lingering questions that I'm just confused on. Is that why did the original people who came off the Liberl Arc, first of all, why did they give out technology the way they did, and yet seem like prepared that in the future it would become a problem again? And secondly, why does the church hide these things and yet seemingly also like master them? Like the dichotomy there implies that for like over 1,000 years, the church has been hoarding all this information and technological secrets. Why? Like why do they feel that that's the best route? And how do they prevent corruption? In fact, Ouroboros itself might be a corrupted wing of what was essentially the church and like the organizations there. And if that's the case, then the church inadvertently gave birth to like one of the worst things that exists in the world. And it's like, that's crazy. And I'm curious to see if that gets explored more, because I hope it is, because this left me with a lot of questions. I thought it was really creepy that we went up to the city and it was full of all those really strange looking monsters. Because like part of me was wondering, this is like was the city completely abandoned? Like did literally everyone get off the ship and then they sealed it away? Or was it a small like rebel faction that got off the Liberl Arc, but there was a good amount of people that stayed on that also got sealed away with it? And then it's like, did they just die in that extra dimensional space? Or did they slowly get turned into the monsters that now haunt that place? It's like, either way, I'm uncomfortable with the answers, but like it feels like it never actually addressed that, because it just doesn't seem likely that everyone would just all unanimously decide, yes, this place that gives us everything we could possibly want and literally lets us dream like heavenly simulations in our head. Yeah, none of us actually want to live here. Who would want to do that? Like I don't know. Like it just doesn't seem likely that it was like a unanimous decision. So yeah, I'm really curious about that. Not that we'll probably be able to get any answers now that it's destroyed. I also want to say like the boss fights. I want to go up like the boss fights that we had. So Blue Blanc, very typical. Like we brought Oliver and Chloe there, but it was very much like it felt more like a battle of ego. I liked how Joshua pointed out that like you don't even have any stakes. So I do think it'd be interesting to explore in the future, if like we see Blue Blanc in a fight that he's more invested in personally. Like is he a lot scarier? Is he able to do a lot more or be a lot more villainous in that situation? Because it feels like he would be, but I don't know. It's just I feel like I want to see more about him because there's a lot to him, but he still was very surface level. Like at least in these stories, the depth of his character, that we didn't even look in his history or understand like his motivations really. It's just more of like, oh yeah, I just love capturing those pivotal moments of people's emotions. He likes watching people who have hope and then watch the hope turn to despair. Like that's okay, he gets his rocks off. It's like, okay, I mean, I kind of get that, but compared to the other enforcers, it feels very flat. Other enforcers wise, so there's Walter. The show off with him and is it Vin? Gosh darn it. I'm like, my brain's shutting down. I'm tired. Zin, not Vin, Zin. Good grief. The fight between Zin and Walter was like such an epic scale, very Kung Fu movie-esque, but then at the same time, like it was so impactful. Like someone said in the comments, and I totally believe it, like if you don't bring Zin to that fight, it feels like insane that you're even allowed to do that. Because it feels like you'd miss out on so much if you just fought him and then he just like, I don't know, walks away or whatever. Like having that showdown and that kind of culmination. Also like the whole idea of Walter, like his backstory, like being that he got so caught up in the feeling and feeling like undeserving. It's funny because it's actually like the same plot as Kung Fu Panda, which I'm pretty sure that this game came out well before. So I almost wonder if Kung Fu Panda stole from like this, or at least, or maybe it's just such a common trope for Kung Fu movies that like it's like they're all stealing from each other. But the idea that like I was this like terrifying like warrior who like rose up against my master and attempted to kill him or successfully killed him. And it's like, what was the motivation? It actually was you who was the better. The master said you were far stronger than me and I couldn't stand it. And so I had to prove myself. And when I proved myself, I accidentally killed him. And then I was like, well, I might as well just go all out with this movie. Like the same plot essentially is like Kung Fu Panda. It's like, okay. But other than that, no, it was actually very well done. Like Kung Fu Panda is like kind of like a silly show. It did have good motivations, but the Walter fight is like pure just motivation and pure plot. I was very happy with it. And the delivery and the way it all played out and happened was really, really cool. The final like punch out between the two, it was kind of hard because of the animation limitations to know like what was happening at the time, if that makes sense. Like it was hard to realize, oh wait, so and so, like I thought Zen had lost for a good while, and then eventually, then he did fall. Again, I also feel like Walter's the one I felt like it would have almost been satisfying if that had been like his end, like if he literally was dead after that fight. But it does make sense that Zin wouldn't intentionally kill him despite his best efforts, because Zin is just that kind of guy. He's too moral to do that, so I get it. But yeah, no, this fight with Zin was good, and then the rematch with Louis Cola was, again, she's so kind of flat. Like her reveals were like, they were shocking, but it was more shocking in the sense that like it didn't make sense that her motivation for working with Ouroboros was that she had dark thoughts, and one day when the person that she loved rejected her love, she decided that the best option was to kill him, shatter the family that she claimed that she loved to this day, and her motivation being, oh, he was going to tear the family apart, so I killed him and tore the family apart. It's like, it feels like, what? Maybe she'll get better fleshed out later, but at the minute she's just very like surface level. Her fight wasn't even like the most interesting of the fights. It was pretty straightforward. Nothing really crazy happened in it. I feel bad for Shara. Her whole worldview got like obliterated in this game, but she's also really strong, so I have no doubt that she's gonna be able to move forward with her life and be effective and see like some good change in her capabilities and her like past, like her like confronting her past. She's already kind of gone through her growth, so she just had to confront a really like nasty truth that she didn't realize about her history. But I'm sure she'll be fine. She's another character that like I could see her not being a mainline character in the future, mostly because I feel like her story is pretty well explored. Though if Louis Cola comes back up, I could see her making an appearance. I just wouldn't be surprised if she's mostly a side character in future games. In fact, I'm pretty sure most of the characters in this game are going to be side characters in future games. Maybe one or two occasionally become a main character, but I guess it would depend entirely on like what are the stories that they're exploring. Are there any other crossovers? Like I would say in future games, if Ren becomes a main character in the future, I would be shocked if Tita, Estelle, or Joshua, or even Chloe don't make some kind of an appearance, whether it be a mainline appearance or a side appearance. That kind of stuff. And so like Louis Cola, if she appears, I would be surprised if Shara wasn't involved somehow in some port, but I don't know how. Let's see. Oh, So and then finally with the Ren fight, again, like what was so disheartening about the Ren fight was how bloodthirsty she got. But then in the end, she did wake up, I guess, or at least like kind of come to terms with the fact that maybe she wants more in her life than Ouroboros, which is really good. And I'm interested to see where that goes. If she gets to keep Peppa Mater with her all the time, like who's gonna stop her, right? But I can't see Ouroboros not building some kind of like loophole or like subversion, a subversive way to reclaim the Peppa Mater. So I would be surprised if Ren always has the Peppa Mater, but if she's never puppeting again in the future, I'll be really disappointed. Her scythe is pretty cool, but I want to see more about the puppeting. I found the puppeting stuff just so fascinating as a technology and as a like a way for the game to grow, and like the more the things that we can to see expressing in the game and the mechanics of it. I want to see that in the future. I don't want that to just be a casual reference and a convenient like, you know, Deus Ex Machina of like, oh, we have all these soldiers but they're puppets, or oh, we have this like we have a imposter among us, oh, but it's not a spy, it's a puppet. You know, like it feels like it's a cop out to like it could be used as a cop out rather than like an interesting concept to explore in and of itself. So I really hope that they don't like just use it as a way to increase stakes without actually like having to face down the reality of like having to attack or take out other humans in order to stop them from doing evil, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. I think Ren was beautiful as a story. I really want to see what happens to her in the future, and frankly, I'd like it if she were a main character in future games, like not just like a side character. I want her to be a main character. I want to know about her past. I want to know about what she's deciding to do with her future. Maybe she's an antagonist in the future. I hope that she can be like at the very least an anti-hero. Like, I don't know, we'll have to see. Just for you, you're saying hello, quickly dropping by during my lunch hour. Congrats on finishing the game. Thank you so much for your support, man. I appreciate you popping in. Yeah, it's been a very quiet stream, I'll say that, and that's okay. We're kind of getting towards the end to wrap it up, but overall, like I said, Chloe is probably my favorite character. Estelle is a really hard second because she's just such a fantastic main character. But my third favorite character, and honestly battling those two for top character, is Ren. I could see Ren being a favorite in the series as a whole, but right now she's still such like a kid who's had such a harsh, like twisted childhood. It's like, I don't know. There's always like I really want to see development from her before I'd be able to say like, oh yeah, like I really think she's gonna be one of my top characters of all time. It's more of like I need to see where they take her or how they use her as a character, or if she just becomes this kind of like ghost in the machine, like in the future, where she'll just kind of pop up occasionally and then vanish into the night. If they do that, I'll be super disappointed because they have so much potential with her that could be really interesting to explore. But we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. But anyway, we have the fights of there, and then we finally got to talk to we faced on the roof against Leon, and his fight was really challenging but really fun. I thought it sucks that he got betrayed, but in turn he did kind of come out and give us like the means to winning against Weissman, and that was a really cool kind of redemption arc. I'm really sad that he died. Like, I mean, part of me is wondering, like, did he die? Because he's such a cool character. It's one of those things where, like, it made it pretty clear, it seemed in the story, like, he's dead. But if he's a big fan character, I could see them trying to, like, oh, but you technically didn't know. He may have made it out as the city collapsed. He's pretty skilled, so, like, maybe he actually did make it. You know, like, I could see them pulling that kind of BS, and I kind of hope they don't because, I don't know. One of the big problems with games like this tends to be the fact that, like, no one ever dies. There's, like, no lasting consequences. You hear about lasting consequences happening, but they're all things that happen off screen. On screen, like everyone just kind of beats each other up and then just moves on, and then they come back later and they beat each other up and then move on. And it's like, no, like, there needs to be some finalities here sometimes, right? There need to be some ends of stories. and they can't be good all the time. I understand like, a lot of these series are being lighthearted, but like, come on, like, you can't have a world that has this much dark, because the darkness in the story is what makes the light shine so bright, right? Like it's it's a relationship between the two. Like, you see people who face such terrible things, like Estelle's mom got killed, and the people who were instigated the war behind it, Estelle's faced them, and she doesn't come off in a rage. She says, look, we can be better than that. Like, that's what makes her so great as a story. Yeah, well, sure, we'll get to that, Just Rio. Like, I'll talk about the Pillar of Salt. But it's like the idea of, like, characters like Estelle are so powerful because, like, despite the fact that she has every reason to want to see these people dead because of what they've done, she doesn't want that, because she still believes intrinsically in her heart that there's better ways, and that's beautiful, even if it's naive. It's like, you can't help but love that. But when the game is delivering every time, being like, you know what, maybe Estelle's perfectly right, and everyone's going to, like, be redeemed, or going to, like, at least they'll never be able to achieve their goals despite how close they get. It's like, I feel like there needs to be times where the bad guys kind of win. There need to be times where the bad guys, like, lose. There need to be times where the good guys sometimes die. There need to be times where the bad guys sometimes die. I think it's all part of, like, what stories need to have, like, real stakes. But I don't know. It's just the way the games go, and if that's the way the writers want to take it, that's fine. But I hope that they are willing to have a balance of the dark and the light. Although they get pretty dark. So we'll go for the Ariel and Weissman. Weissman, he's so evil, he makes evil people feel inadequate. Ironically, I feel like he's a better Voldemort than Voldemort, because Voldemort is, like, built up as this, like, super villain, but, like, when it comes to it, like, he's almost, like, bad at being a villain. But ultraviolence, it's on the screen. Yes, it's time for ultraviolence, one of my favorite, like, little snippets from the game. Anyway, the idea that Weissman and his, like, machinations with Ariel, like, he's so mustache twirlingly evil, but he works better than Voldemort, because Voldemort in, like, Harry Potter, he's just like, I kill people because I can kill people, and ha ha ha, and, like, I don't want to die, so I do everything in my power to not die, including kill people. Sorry, I'm just, like, entranced by Gilbert's, like, S-craft attack. Oh man, it's a thing of beauty, isn't it? It's so good. And I like how it makes you weakened, because it just he makes you just not want to fight anymore, because you're like, wow, that was just pathetic. Anyway, sorry, getting distracted by my background, like, footage. But the, like, Weissman is so maniacally evil, like, it's almost absurd. But it works because he's delivering on how evil he is. That's the problem. Like, Voldemort struggled to deliver. Like, things die, people die in that story, but even then, it's like, it almost feels like more like accidents rather than actual, like, maliciousness or like evil. Like, there's a couple where it is, but still, for some reason, it just doesn't have the impact of Weissman, who, like, he's just so, like, disregarding of people and their value. And there's also the stigma, which is something that apparently people were very clear, like, you're going to explore that in the future. Oh, sorry, Joshua, you have a question. You said, not sure if you mentioned this already, but do you think Estelle is kind of a Mary Sue character? I'm not saying it's good or bad, just in a way, just wondering. I don't think so, because a Mary Sue character is a character that can ultimately do no wrong, and even when they're wrong, they're right. If you want a perfect example in modern, like, modern content of a Mary Sue, look at the Amazon Rings of Power series with Galadriel. Galadriel, in that story, is literally the reason why Sauron is as successful as he is, and her actions directly lead to the death and corruption of the world, essentially. and yet the show never points it out, because the only way that the story can work is that ultimately she was right the whole time anyway. And when she makes a mistake, it was because anybody would have made that mistake. It wasn't like a mistake she made. It was that, oh, of course, like she that happened. It was going to happen regardless. And it's like, no, you're like, a Mary Sue character is a character that can do no wrong. And when they do wrong, it's not their fault. That's a Mary Sue. Estelle is not a Mary Sue because she makes tons of mistakes and she fails a lot. She grows and becomes strong through her failures. Joshua left her, and she was powerless to stop that. She fought enemies, and there's a lot of times where she doesn't actually defeat them. She holds them off. She drives them away, but she doesn't beat them. There are times where she's sprawled out on the ground, barely able to stand on her feet, and is as good as dead, if not for the fact that she held out long enough that help was able to arrive. Stell could not have done this without the help and support of her friends and family. The closest she gets to Mary Sue is in the second chapter, but that's because she's at the culmination of her story arc. She's learned and suffered through her mistakes, and now is kind of stepping into her element and becoming like her dad, where she is like a hero of her own power and doesn't need to rely on others because she understands her limits and because she's willing to make the tough choices. That's why she doesn't make her a Mary Sue, in my opinion. I think Mary Sue would never feel like she was at a disadvantage. A Mary Sue character is like, if there's a Mary Sue in the game, it's Cassius, actually, because Cassius, whenever he shows up, he just wins. And even if he's outplayed, it's not something he didn't account for, kind of a thing, you know? So if you're looking for a Mary Sue in the game, it's Cassius. Her dad is very much the Mary Sue of the game. Now, she is a hero, a main character, so she definitely succeeds where other people don't. But I would argue that there's a lot of good stories that have main characters that are like that. Immediately comes to mind is Kaladin from Way of Kings. He's not a Mary Sue character, even though he's absolutely strong and he's the linchpin of success for the stories and narratives that we see in that book. But he fails. He struggles. He has to fight for everything he gets, and when he gets, he spends moments bemoaning what he lost along the way. So yeah, I would say Estelle's not a Mary Sue. I think she's just a protagonist in a positive leaning story. It's like not a grimdark story. She's a protagonist in a positive story. So she ultimately wins. But she has to suffer and fail a lot of the time. A good example too of like the failure. Think about the going to visit all the different towers and trying to like fight the different enforcers at the tops of the towers. You quickly realize at the end that all of that was literally useless. They were trying their best to try and solve a problem, and they were working with the information they had, but in the end, they literally did nothing because everything that needed to happen happened. The enforcers got away. They didn't even defeat the enforcers properly then. Essentially, they went and they fought and they struggled to only have things play out exactly the same as they would have otherwise. So yeah, no, that's abject failure right there. Even though it felt like you were winning, you were absolutely we were losing the entire time as soon as those towers started being activated. So Joshua, you respond, I thought of her as a Mary Sue character, but one that's excused well or nuanced. But I suppose that defined failure differently than you. Yeah. I can see that. Again, that I would describe that as being just that's why I talk about being a successful protagonist. It's like, I feel like almost every story, like unless the hero loses, essentially comes out like that in the end. And there's a part of us that knows that like even if things look really dire, that most of the time when we're reading a book, that like at least some of those people are going to survive and win. A more grimdark version would be something like Game of Thrones, where there's a lot of characters that you follow who do just die, who do fail. Now maybe they succeed in the end or in the great scheme of things, but they do die or they do fail. And that's definitely not the vibe I'm getting from these types of stories. But even then, like, there'd be characters like, I mean, even in that story, I think of like Jon Snow as a character who can't even die properly, right? Like, he's very much kind of, in that, by that definition, I'd argue he's also a Mary Sue type character in a very grimdark, like, grounded in reality type of narrative where nobody's safe. But there's certain characters that they just can't really fail, and even when they fail, they succeed. But yeah, I do see what you're saying though. Like, I'm not saying that you're I'm not saying that you're wrong to think of her as a Mary Sue. I just feel like if by that scale, almost every main character of every story is a Mary Sue. Excuse me. So the reason I don't define that is because, I guess my definition of a failure for a character is that they go into a situation with a goal, and that goal is not achieved or it's subverted, and like, the best they can manage is like kind of scooping together something cohesive at the end. Another good example of it in this is with Ren. When Ren tried to instigate a new coup in Grancel with the tank, right? And the intelligence division. Technically that failed, but Ren never intended it to succeed. She was mostly curious to see how far she could push them. But her intention was never to actually have the coup work. So in the end, Ren won. And so Estelle, despite the fact that she worked so hard with her team to try and save the capital, when it came to the larger game, she failed. So you thought a failure is more of a failure of character, like failing into temptation or something like that. Okay, that's true. Estelle never does that. So I can see that being the case that in that regard, being like, okay, so like she never wavered. Like, the closest she got was Ouroboros, and you're like, she never really was tempted by Ouroboros. You're absolutely right about that, which I think was cool, but I can see that being like it never felt like she actually was wrestling with like the morality of that, and that is a big like, okay, kind of like moment where I can see that being like, yeah, she didn't truly fail because she's never had to like face major consequences of her own actions. Maybe that's it. Maybe a true failure is when you make a choice and you have dire personal consequences that you have to face. And she never has that, because she never makes a choice that leads to bad things happening to people she cares about, and having to confront that. The only times where that kind of happens is because she doesn't have the information she needs to make a proper choice. Like when Joshua leaves her. If she'd understood Ouroboros, what they were doing, and what they'd done to him, maybe she could have prevented that from happening. But because she had no information, she lost Joshua and failed in that way. But could she really have ever succeeded because she had no means of a path to success? So yeah, like, is that truly a failure when she couldn't have won? And I don't know. And the towers is another good example. Like, they were trying to shut down the towers and they failed. But could they have actually won that? Or was that something that was in, like, that they had such little understanding of that they couldn't have prevented it even if they wanted to? Yeah. So maybe not. Maybe that's not really a failure either. Yeah, for you, she never makes an evil choice. Yeah. But it's also one of those things too, like, could Estelle ever make a willing evil choice? Like, it just feels like it would be... I'm so against like her personality, and maybe in that regard that's why she would be considered Mary Sue, because like the idea of her being a villain even for a little while is like kind of laughable. Although if she had, what if that were a future game? Like, what if in a future game we followed Estelle and then she gets to a pivotal choice point and she makes the bad choice, and then then instead we follow Joshua and he has to try and rescue her from her evil choice. Watching Estelle fall, it would be so heartbreaking. It actually might be an interesting story. I don't want it to ever happen, but could you imagine that? Could you imagine that actually being a story? That would be insane. Anyway, really got off on a tangent there, which is fine. But my voice is definitely giving out, so I need to kind of wrap things up here. So the stigma, the idea that you can etch essentially magic into someone's soul and it can control them and make them a bit of a puppet. is horrifying, and the implication too that the church played around with that a little bit, and that might be where they got the information about how it works from, is really interesting. I want to know more about it. But the other thing about it that I hated is like, wasn't like, I mentioned it a couple times in the show, and I'm gonna say it again. One of the biggest things I hated about Weissman was this idea that he sells himself as this like kind of like a moral kind of character, where like he's like, yeah, you don't agree with my methodologies, but I have a purpose for what I do, and I think it's right, and like I have these standards. And one of the standards that he says he upholds is like, hey, we don't coerce anyone in Ouroboros to be in Ouroboros. Like, they're here of their own free will, and we don't force them to work with us. They're doing this because they want to. And that really lost teeth when he suddenly, when you like look at like, okay, so he like brainwashed and manipulated Joshua, because like I can understand like brainwashing might be a cheating way to achieve that, but I assumed he was brainwashing everybody. And then he's like, oh no, it's just Joshua. I was like, okay, well that's kind of weird. Anyway, Just Rio, thank you so much for being here. Have a good night, and yeah, come back and watch the rest if you get the time. But yeah, thanks for being here. Anyway, so going back to it. So like at first I was like, well, that's really weird that he like nobody in Ouroboros is here except by choice, except for Joshua, but we don't talk about Joshua. It's like, okay. And then we get to the point later on where he's just like, oh, you know what? This has been a fun fight, but it's not fair if you get to have Ouroboros members on your side. So he snaps his fingers and uses a stigma to completely override Joshua's like personality and turns him into like essentially a puppet. I'm like, what's the point then? You make it sound like you want to get Joshua back, but if you're gonna just make him be a puppet anyway, it's like, doesn't that go against what you like toted as your like personal values? So I'm kind of glad that Weissman has a finale point here, because I think he actually was in the end a bad villain. I think he was built up to be so good, but then tripped at the finish line because they needed to try and make it feel like Joshua was going to be turning sides. And I get that the power of that moment of him like seemingly switching sides and Estelle being able to bring him back from the brink as well. I thought that was really cool. And the idea of building a like hypnotic suggestion that would be a kind of a release for Joshua so that he could be permanently detached from Ouroboros from now on, narratively was very cool. But I feel like it came at the cost of like one of what made Weissman so compelling was this idea that like you always wondered, maybe he's right, maybe he's in the right of it, but then at the end he just has this like evil monologue of how like people are weak, I'm gonna make them strong, and like by conquering and destroying them. Okay, alright dude, whatever. So I lost a lot of ground for me in the end. The final fight with him was fantastic. The 3 layers of fighting him on the ground, and like his like unique abilities, like him being able to banish like Chloe for like 3 turns was crazy. And then the final fight with him when he fused with the Aureole and became like a literal like biblically accurate angel was really cool. Apparently though, that fight did not go down super well. Like not well, but like apparently there's a lot of really intense things that fight can happen in that fight, and I never saw like some of the bigger like more dynamic like abilities that can fire. And I also like never truly understood the mechanic of the changing light representing the different types of damages that could be taken. I got it at a basic level, but I thought it was either arts or physical damage, but apparently it goes a lot deeper than that. Like it's even types of arts damage, which I never really saw manifest just because I was able to beat the fight in a decent way. But yeah, in the end I thought the fight was fun. Like the fight was way more fun than the story delivery for Weissman, in my opinion. I feel like that was a bit of a disappointment. Not so much that it ruined the game, but just like to see it fire on so many on all cylinders so well as a narration, and then to have him be such a cartoonishly evil villain with a motivation that contradicts like what made him so fascinating to begin with as a villain was very disappointing. So he fails. And then I liked how Kevin like just comes up out of the blue as a assassin. Essentially, I love the revelation that essentially like Kevin and the Grail Streeters are essentially Ouroboros but church oriented. Was really cool, because it's like, what if the church becomes villains in the future? Because like they easily could be villains. They're doing the same things Ouroboros is, but they seem to just be reined in a little more. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And I want to see Kevin more too. Like I want to know more about like how he feels about things, and like I wonder if there's going to be an arc where he has to decide if he wants to stay with the church or if he feels like they're being led astray and strikes it out on his own, because I could see him doing that. Because he looked really sad that he had to kill Weissman, despite the fact that it was probably the right thing to do. Being the person that has to make that call, like he clearly hated it. But then also that pillar of salt weapon itself, the implication that like it was a utilization of something that like had destroyed an entire like landmass or something is insane. I feel like that's a reference to maybe a misuse of another like mega gem like the Ariel, but like the one that's like Earth oriented rather than the space oriented one. Which I'm just really excited to see if we get to see more about those like really big, like super powerful, like god level gemstones, like what they could do. I imagine it'll come up in the future games, because it feels like something that's going to be explored later on. One thing I was a little like disappointed by was like they made all this hype up about how the Ariel became like somewhat sentient and was making choices on behalf of other people. But the manifestation of that sentience apparently was that it willingly fused itself with a flesh person and then became like an angel being, and then decided to leave him at the end. But it's like, I was expecting more. Like, I thought we were going to actually have a conversation with it. I thought Weissman was going to like absorb it into himself or like incorporate it, and then it was going to reject him or take him over. And then it was going to become the true villain at the end all along, you know? Like, I thought Weissman was going to be consumed by his greed and be killed by the Ariel, and that the Ariel was going to be the final villain. And was going to be and its motivation was essentially going to be like, I'll put you back together type of thing. This idea of like, humanity can't be trusted. I will guide you to a future of peace, you know, through violence. That's what I thought it was going to be. And so I thought that was why we're going to have to destroy it. And that was really, so I was surprised it didn't take that route. If we do get to find the Ariel in future, I wonder if we'll actually be able to address that. Because other than like, some of the basic facts that it had a somewhat autonomy, it doesn't seem nearly as intelligent as it should have, considering what it was supposed to be, considering that it was like apparently fighting against the resistance, and it was like programming people's dreams of fulfilling their wishes. Like, that's way more intelligent than what we saw. So, I don't know. I was also wondering if it was intelligent, did it go crazy being locked away for like 1,000 years? They implied it was locked away in time mostly, so it was frozen for most of the time. But like when it came out, like, did it have thoughts about the state of the world when it emerged from the time dimension? What was its answer to the state of things, and would it have changed if it had been allowed to continue? I don't know. Like, I really wanted to know that stuff, and we never got that, so that was really disappointing. But it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just, it was disappointing. The city fall was pretty cool. It did feel a little ham-fisted, like the way it made sure that Estelle and Joshua were separated and made sure that they like were in a position where we thought they might possibly die. But I also like how it kind of pushed them to have an embrace, and then they were rescued by the dragon and Cassius, you know, the Mary Sue of the game, you know, makes sense. But like, it was just fun. It was a very heartfelt and very emotional ending, and I really enjoyed it. And so overall, 10 out of 10. This game was fantastic. The first and second games, especially together, they're so beautiful. I really, really enjoyed it, and I'm so happy that my patrons pointed me in this direction, because I don't know if I would have taken the bait. Like, I get a lot of suggestions for a lot of games, and there's a lot of games, especially like new games that come out, that I get really excited about playing. Like, heck, in the next little while, Avowed is supposed to come out. I'm gonna play the crap out of that, because that game looks fantastic. It's made by a studio I really enjoy, Obsidian. So I'm gonna play the crap out of that. I don't think I'll make a series on YouTube about it, but I'm excited to explore that game. But then you look into this type of series, like I was like, yeah, like maybe I'll consider it. But then like they were so persistent, and like they even like don't feel like you have to send me stuff to motivate me. But like when I had a P.O. box for a while, someone sent me like art book for the game. It said like, hey, like this game is amazing and you'll love this art book, but you shouldn't look at it yet because it might have spoilers in it. So it's just sitting on my shelf, and I'm really excited to get into it, especially now. But I'm still waiting, because I think it covers multiple games, so I have to wait to look at it. But like that became such a big motivator, because I was like, look, if someone's gonna go to that trouble to be like, look, this game is so good and I think you'll enjoy it so much, I'm gonna send you an art book for the game. like, that's a really good pitch. And so I tried it, and I'm so happy I did. So thank you so much for being, for cutting through the noise and helping me prioritize this series, because we're going to play this series all the way through now. I can't wait to continue this game. It's been so much fun. Again, I usually try and capstone these things with best girl, best boy, which I will do, but it's not going to be that surprising because it hasn't really changed from the first game. Best boy, maybe that did change a little bit. I think it was Joshua, and I still really like Joshua, but I don't know. Zin really grew on me in this game with his backstory and his fight with Walter. There was something really threatening. And then Kevin. Kevin at the end really caught my eye. I think Kevin could become a bigger favorite than Joshua for me, but I feel like I need to know more about him first. Like, as it is, I don't feel like I know him well enough to be able to say, like, oh yeah. Like, I still do really like Joshua, but I think Joshua needs to do some more growth because he's been so reactionary his whole life so far, where his growth has been at the expense of others' wishes for him, including his return from Ouroboros, because it was Estelle who kind of gave him that push to come back. I'm hoping that we'll get to see him explore more of what he wants to do with his life on his terms and not feel like his decisions are incumbent on the wills of others. Even if the will of Estelle is way more positive than anybody else's, I still want to see him bloom into his own person. So it's Joshua, but with Kevin nipping at his heels. Best girl, Chloe still. She's probably one of the best girls of all games I've played so far, which is really good. Estelle is a real close second, even of all games, but especially this game. And then Ren is a running third. But Ren could become my favorite character easily if she gets explored in the future and she actually has like story arcs and we get to see her kind of become her own individual rather than, again, like Joshua, a puppet of circumstance. I really want to see that, and if we do, I genuinely could see me I could see her becoming my all-time favorite character, because there's just so much depth and potential to her, and I'm very excited to see where that goes. Yeah, and then finally, I guess towards the end, all in all, just absolutely fantastic game. I'm kind of sad it's over, but I'm happy knowing that there's a lot more to explore and future games to like dive into. So yeah, we'll be able to do that. But I do have an announcement, and that is what we're going to be continuing on Thursday this week. Because I'll tell you, it might not be what you think. I said a while ago, and so it won't be a surprise to anyone who's been paying attention, but I don't want to just dive too much into dedicating into certain storylines. I kind of do that with the visual novels. I did that for Muv-Luv, and I got tied up in Muv-Luv for years. And now I'm doing Higurashi and Umineko. And not only did I commit to doing those like together essentially, but I feel like especially with the way they break up the chapters, you kind of have to play them all in order, because otherwise you're going to forget too much between them. So I'm going to do that. But for Legend of Heroes, I don't want to be super just like Legend of Heroes. Like, I'm not going to be a Legend of Heroes channel. I want to do diverse stuff. And there's another series I really fell in love with right before I started Legend of Heroes. And so, as I said at that time, we are going to be bouncing back and forth between them. So, we're taking a step away. And before we do the third Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, because it's technically, I guess it follows, like, it has a lot of similar stuff and similar places to trek, but I think the main character is different, and it's going to focus on different characters in general. So, yeah, I feel like it's a good time to step away from the series for just a little bit. And we're going to start trading off between two different series. And the second series is Yakuza. I loved Yakuza 0. I feel like I loved it more than it came across in the videos. And and Yakuza is a series like Legend of Heroes that's like still being made today. There's new titles coming out. So I gotta catch up. I want to be able to play those new games soon. Well, not soon, but like I want to be able to eventually work my way up to like where everyone else is who's already fans. And so we're gonna start. So we're gonna step away from Legend of Heroes, but we will return, and we're gonna start doing some trade back and forth with Yakuza. So, as a capstone to this fantastic game and this wonderful rap party, we always end it with kind of an outro that showcases what we're going to be playing next. So thank you so much for being here today. We're going to end on the note of the Yakuza, kind of like the intro video for it. But before I go, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. If you listened to this entire thing, thank you. If you were here live and left your comments, I really appreciate it. It's always wonderful to hear back and forth there. But if you didn't and you were here like in post, please leave a comment if you want to. I'll still try and respond to it, though I for some reason don't get notifications very much when people post on a live stream. So hopefully I don't miss it. But regardless, thank you for spending your time here, for sharing this with me, for sharing the journey of Legend of Heroes with me. If you want to watch me play more, like, trust me, it will happen in the future. We're just going to take a little breather, and we're going to play a little bit of Yakuza Kiwami. So if you're willing to wait with me and maybe join me for that series in the meantime, I'd love to have you there. I hope you do. And if you decide you want to wait until I'm posting Legend of Heroes again, just keep me on the back burner. I like to think that I can be making content that can keep you coming back for more, but I also consume YouTube on my own. I know how it is, and you know, if you need to take a break while you wait for me to do more Legend of Heroes, that's perfectly fine. But know that it will happen. I'm committed. I'm gonna play every game in the Legend of Heroes saga if I can, or die trying. So just know that that is going to happen. But we'll get to all of that later. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for joining me on the channel, especially to the patrons and members who support me directly. It means the world to me that you're doing that, and I hope that you'll be able to continue to do so and find reason to stick around all the more. But until the next video you're watching me or happen to see me in next, I'll see you there. Talk to you later, guys.